Hey there, Chris here, and today I wanted to just spend a few minutes to explain the features and the benefits of using my textured paint palette. So you might be asking yourself, why do I need a textured paint palette when I'm doing dry brush technique to paint my 3D models? Now, traditionally, a lot of people will just use a paper towel, and they'll get their paint, and then they'll just go back and forth to really just get all of the paint off of their brush to use the dry brush technique. Now, it does work, but the con of using a paper towel is its main job is to soak up moisture, and it does exactly that in your brush. It will actually take all of the moisture out of your brush, and you need some moisture in your brush when you're doing the dry brush technique. You're just removing a lot of the paint, but when you remove that moisture, that paint actually starts to really just dry out in your brush. And that's how you can get some of those chalky looking dry brushes when you're doing it on your model. Now, when you're using a texture board, you have your paint, and then you can take your paint and then you can use the texture board to remove that paint with these grooved edges. And that way you can remove the paint and it does not suck out the moisture out of your brush. So then you can get a lot more smoother looking dry brush techniques. So I wanted to go over the different areas of my textured paint palette so you can understand what areas are for what. Now first, I have a blank area to the left of the board. And this is where you can actually just take your paints and squirt them directly on your board, just like a regular paint palette. So you could use this area just to have some paint so you can get it off and then be painting your figures. Or you can actually put some paint here and just dip it, then use these areas to remove the paint from your brush. So when it comes to the four main areas of my textured paint palette, each area serves different purposes. So if you're wanting to just get a little bit of paint off of your brush, let's say you're using a stippling technique with your dry brush, you don't want a lot of the paint off, but you need to get some of it off. So all you would do is use this bigger area to really remove some of that paint. Then sequentially, the further you go to the right, the more and more paint it will remove from your brush. So if you need a really good dry brush and you need to get it all off, the farthest column will help you out with that because of the ridged pattern. Now when it comes to using your textured paint palette, you can use any type of dry brush you want. I sometimes like to use makeup brushes because they really give you a good effect just like a regular dry brush. Or you can actually just use dry brushes. These are from the Army Painter. Now when it comes to the paints that you can use on this textured paint palette, they can be any kind of paints you want, whether that be miniature paints or craft acrylic hobby paints. So I have this rocky base for a model I'm starting to paint. I've already primed it black, and now I want to just dry brush this. So I want to show you two techniques to where you can get great results using the textured paint palette. All right, so the first paint I'm going to be using is just a hobby acrylic paint, and this is just a dark gray. Now all I'm going to do is squirt the paint directly on the board. And I'm going to be using my larger dry brush. And all I'm going to do is kind of roll my brush to be able to get paint all around the bristles. Now, I'm not going to get it, just jab it in there. I'm just trying to get it on the bristles. Now that I have paint on my brush, I'm just going to drag this back and forth to be able to get some of the paint off. I'm going to go ahead and take my brush, and I'm going to be using a stipple technique with my dry brush, and I'm just going to be dabbing it. And the great thing about using this technique, you can get some really nice textures. Now when I'm not getting any more paint off of it, I just go back to my paint, get some paint on it, and then I'm going to just drag it back and forth again to get a lot of the paint off. And then I'm just going to go back to my model and start stippling again. So now we have a really nice textured looking rock. Now to just bring out the definition, let's use a traditional dry brush technique using the textured paint palette. So I'm going to use this Vallejo Wolf Gray. So I'm going to put a little bit on the palette. And I'm going to use a smaller dry brush for this one. And same thing, I'm just going to get my brush saturated. But now we're going to go to the far right, and I'm going to get rid of as much as I can. And also a good test when you're done, rub it on your hand to see if any comes off. If you can see just a little bit, that's just the right amount. So now I'm going to just barely hit some of the highlighted edges of this rock. And I'm just holding back on my brush. So I'm just barely hitting all of the raised edges, and this is going to give them all some really nice definition. So there we go. We have a really nice textured rock using two techniques using the textured paint palette. Just as regular stippling approach and a traditional dry brush. And this is going to look great on my base. I still have a few little things that I'm going to add to it, but for only a few minutes, this turned out awesome. Now the one thing is when you're done and you still have paint left, be sure to actually wipe off that paint with a paper towel. And all you've got to do is just grab a paper towel and just wipe it off. Like that. And there we go. And after it dries, it's ready to use again. Now over time, your texture board will start to look like this. This is the one that I use all the time. Now if you feel like you've got too much paint buildup and you wanted to do something about it, you can absolutely just hit this with a rattle can spray primer, whatever color you choose, and the textures will still be here. Using a textured paint palette will definitely up your game when it comes to your dry brush techniques. Thanks a lot for watching, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me through my website contact form.